Do your reading and writing tasks feel like an afterthought, or are they building blocks for language proficiency? Well, this is my second episode in the CI Toolbox series, and we're going to focus on reading and writing activities that engage students through movement, visuals, collaboration, and just the right amount of challenge. I'll share strategies to help students process and produce language in meaningful, low-stress ways. So, let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for hanging out with me here on the podcast. I have so much respect for you as a teacher because you are looking at your teaching, being a part of this conversation, listening to ideas about teaching. Such a rock star. So thank you so much for hanging out with me each week as we dive into the world of language teaching. So we're going to be talking about reading and writing today, and I will be honest, many years back before I got all into this world of proficiency-based teaching and CI strategies, I used to hand out a reading passage with 10 comprehension questions, and you know what the reaction of students was? Yep, they would groan, and frankly, so did I. So once I started using more CI-friendly activities, those activities that are much more proficiency-driven, things like, drawing the sentence and running dictation, all the things we're going to talk about, the engagement and the interest of students totally spiked, and I also started having a lot more fun. I enjoyed teaching, 20, 25 years ago, but I have a lot more fun with it now as I'm engaging more with students and I'm seeing that they are engaged as well. And I also started to see that students were not just reading, but they were really writing about what they were reading and showing that they understood it in ways that move beyond just simple comprehension questions, as they were able to do more with it, show what they truly understood within it and what they could do with it once they understood something that they were reading or listening to. So all of this just made for a much more vibrant classroom, and I'm so excited to be able to share these activities with you so that you can try them out in your classroom as well. So in this episode, we're going to look at 6 activities, and these are all in my CI Toolbox. And this is a document that I created. It's free. You can download it on my website. It's at wlclassroom.com/toolbox. I'll also put the link in the show notes. But on here, it has these 6 activities I'm going to talk about, but it's grouped in with the reading and writing, and there are 2 other sections for other ways of looking at CI activities. But we're going to focus on reading and writing activities today. And these are really going to help to support and engage our students in their proficiency growth. Now, in my previous episode on these CI strategies, we looked at interaction and discussion. So those are the types of activities. So we're going to change the focus from more of the spoken interaction discussion type activities to reading and writing. Now, sometimes when we look at CI, we don't immediately think about reading and writing because we think of it as comprehensible input. So students are listening and showing their understanding, and that's how they're acquiring the language. But we can take this idea of comprehensible input and move it into reading and writing as well, so that we are engaging all of the communication modes and not just staying in the interpretive. Because reading and writing should feel interactive, not these passive activities that they're doing on their own in terms of listening or reading or just writing on their own. But this should be interactive and connected to the input. And this is going to be in line with the student's proficiency level so that they can engage with it. So it's moving beyond this idea that CI always means it's the interpretive because it's comprehensible input, but we are going to engage with the input in ways that help students to hone their reading and writing skills and grow in those proficiency areas as well. So these particular activities are going to move beyond simple worksheets, when I mentioned those comprehension questions earlier on. So it's going to move beyond that idea to really foster comprehension, absolutely, but then also creativity and meaningful engagement with the target language, with the input that they are getting. So as we go through each of these activities I'm going to share, I just want to point out that it's important to start with a text. Because when we're doing anything that is CI-oriented, comprehensible input-oriented, you want to start with the input. So the best thing is start with the input that's in the form of something that students are listening to, something that you are reading together, but you have a foundational text that's around the unit, and then you're going to use these activities to help the students engage with the unit. Rather than saying that you're going to try these activities on random topics that aren't necessarily connected, because that doesn't keep it communicative. But if you have a simple text or maybe even a complicated text that you're working with, but start there so that each of the activities is in reference to that text. And if you're at the novice level, it can be one paragraph or maybe two paragraphs. If you're in the intermediate level, it could be a full page story. It could be an article you're reading on something that's multiple pages. So it all depends on the proficiency level, but you can tweak each one of these activities depending on which level your students are at and what the level of that text is. So when we say text, it doesn't have to mean this 500 to 1,000 word text or story or book or something. It can be a simple paragraph or two paragraphs that tell a story that students can read or listen to and understand, and then you'll engage with these activities. So for the most part, once you start to engage with the reading and writing, this is going to be students engaging with it and producing, so it's more output oriented based on the input. So I would recommend that before you start doing these output oriented tasks, these reading and writing tasks, that you should try some of the activities from episode 218, where I talked about the CI activities that are based on discussion and interaction, because that's going to truly make sure that students are understanding, comprehending the text that you're working with. So then the next stage would be to engage with their understanding of the text through reading and writing. And I'll make sure that the link to episode 218 is in the show notes if you want to go back and listen to that as well. But also all of those activities are in the CI Toolbox document, and that link is in the show notes as well. So you can see all of these together with examples, how long they'll take, and you can use them right away in your classroom. But as we look at these reading and writing tasks, it's sort of the second stage after you've done some interaction and understanding of the text, those types of activities, before moving on to these. So the first activity we'll look at is what we refer to as one word at a time. And this is where you're going to build writing fluency and creativity collaboratively within groups or the entire class. So this, as it sounds like, is one word at a time. So you start with a student has a sheet of paper, or you could do it in groups of 2 or 3, and they start the story with one word, and then they pass it on to another group, or they pass it on to another student, and they write another word to the story there. So students take turns adding one word at a time to build out a sentence or even the entire story. So when a student or a small group gets the paper and they look at the sentence and they say, actually, it would be best to put a period here and end that sentence and then start a new one, they don't have to necessarily continue on with each sentence. But the idea is they are retelling the story that you have read together, or they're retelling some information that is in a text that was an informational text that you read together, or something that you listened to as a class or they listened to individually. So I found that this works best when everyone starts at the same time. So each group is starting a story at the same time. So say you have 5 or 6 groups in your class, they're groups of 2 or 3, or you have individual students, and they're all starting with one word, and then they pass the paper on to another group. But typically everyone is starting with a different word. So when they get the paper, they're continuing on someone else's story, and just have the paper rotating around the classroom until you get to some period where you want to stop, and then you can take them all individually, and you'll end up with 5, 6, 7, possibly 20, 25, depending on how many in your class, you'll have that many versions of the story that's been recreated with different words that have been added on. And as students are doing this, and as groups are doing this, if they're adding a verb, they have to be aware of what else is in the sentence in terms of who the subject might be. So they have to make sure that the verb is in the correct form if your language has verb conjugations, something to that effect. And a quick tip about this is to make sure that you are on a theme so that it doesn't just get wild and crazy in terms of what's being added on. And that's why I always say that it's good to start with a text that you're all referring back to and keep students focused. You might say that you want to include at least 2 or 3 adjectives within this 2 or 3 sentence story. So if you're reading the sentence and there's not an adjective in there yet, and you have an opportunity when it's your turn to put the word in to use an adjective, that you'll want to put it there. This is going to help to make sure that they are putting the adjective in the right place in reference to the noun, and also the correct form of the adjective. So it's not just about adding a word to the sentence as they're telling the story, but they have to be aware of the form and the accuracy of it as well. And if you're working with novice students, use really familiar words. You might even provide them with a word bank or some sentence starters to start the sentence for them or to start the story. Whereas with intermediate students, you can add some constraints. You could say the stories must be in the past tense, or as I said with adjectives, or the entire story needs to be in the first person or the third person because you want to focus on particular verb forms. And then once students have done this, you can type up the various versions of the story and then use it as a CI reading activity the next day in class, where they can compare the different stories that came up as the papers are going around the room. Now, typically when we say the stories, it's going to be 2 or 3 sentences max, but you could see how many different versions of retelling the story, the information can happen when they're just adding one word at a time. The next activity is what we'll call embedded reading, and this is to scaffold comprehension by layering increasingly complex versions of the text on each other. So you want to start with a bare bones version of the text, maybe 3 to 5 key sentences, depending on the level of the text that you're using, and ask some comprehension questions. This is based on a text you've already seen for the most part, but ask some bare bones comprehension questions. And then provide the next version that has added details. Maybe there's a dialogue put in, and repeat and connect to the prior knowledge as well. So start with the bare bones and you keep adding it on. So if you are reading a story and you want to then engage in this activity after, start with 2 to 3 sentences, and then you could have students add on details to add on sentences to it so that it is getting longer and more complex. And what ends up happening here is if they know all the details from the story, they can keep adding on sentences, and you'll be surprised how much they can add on to, and it keeps going. And then you can go even further and you can have them continue to add details, continue to add sentences where they're inventing new details to add to the story that wasn't in it originally. But this whole idea of embedded reading is to start at that key bare bones level. That's the version you want to start with. You could even start your activity before they've even read the entire text. Start with that 2 to 3 sentences and then add on another sentence that puts on another detail. So for example, if you had a story where it says, Sarah has a cat and the cat is in a tree, that's the bare bones version. And then you add on the second part of the story and you could say, okay, what could the cat's name be? And where does she live? You could do anything like that. But then you could add on the second version and say, okay, now Sarah has a cat and it's small and it's, pretty crafty and mischievous at times. Then one day the cat goes up a tree and it can't come down. So you see, that's a more complex version than Sarah has a cat and the cat's in a tree, because now you're describing the cat, you're saying what the cat did and what the problem is. And then you can add on a third version where you say what happened once the cat couldn't come down. How did Sarah get the cat to come out of the tree? Did the cat ever come down out of the tree? So that's a very simple version of how you're doing this. But if you're reading a CI novel, you could, after 3 or 4 chapters, start with one sentence for each chapter, and and then add on. What's another sentence? Have students contribute to adding on to it, so that you're starting with this embedded reading of the bare bones version and then adding details on. And as much as you can engage students in adding on those details, then they'll be engaging with the text as well. Just a few tips on this is to make sure that you have a story that students know that they've already engaged with, so they're not creating too much of a diversion if they're adding details onto the story. The story's not going to change. They're just going to change perhaps some of the details or add a few new details onto it. And in terms of differentiation, always allow novices to work with visuals to scaffold each level if they don't understand all the language that's in there. And as you get up into the intermediate level, you could even start with bare bones, say, in the present tense. And now you're going to say, okay, now we're going to put the story in the future tense or the past tense to change it up to make it a little more grammatically complex. But this whole idea of the embedded reading is to start at a level that is totally comprehensible to students, and then with each subsequent version that you're adding on details and complexity, and to the extent that you can, have students engage with that as well in adding those details, but make sure that you stay true to what actually happens in the story and it doesn't get derailed too much. The next activity is what we call volleyball reading. And this is where you're going to pair students together and they're going to bounce reading and comprehension back and forth between each other. So that's what we refer to as the volleyball. They volley between each other. So what does this look like? So say you have two partners, you have A and B. So A reads a sentence aloud in the target language. This is from the text that you've been reading and working with. Then partner B translates what that sentence means into their common language. And then they switch roles. So once they translate it, then they read the next sentence in the target language in the story and go back and forth. This works really well with CI novels or stories that you're reading, and it really emphasizes understanding to make sure that students understand. And I know there are some various ways of thinking about translation and the need for it, but when students are able to truly show that they understand and they comprehend, then they can do so much more with the text after. So what you can formatively tell very quickly as you go around is if students are truly understanding the story and they're understanding enough of the vocabulary and the structures to be able to explain what's happening. I would say this is more of a novice level activity because it involves more translation, but it does give students an opportunity to show what they understand and for you to see how students are engaging and understanding with the text. And a tip for this is to coach students to check each other as they're going and look at each other's understanding and to gently, sort of suggest that, oh, I don't think that that's what that word means. I think you would say it this way, or you would translate it this way, or you didn't quite understand that sentence exactly as it is, so they can help each other as well. And then once students have done that, as a follow-up, you can ask students to choose their favorite paragraph and rewrite it with a twist, with a different setting, an outcome, or a tense, because you know that they understand it really well because they've just done the volleyball reading back and forth. The next activity is called Draw the Sentence. Students really enjoy this activity and it is a lot of fun. And it's a way of connecting visuals to a text for a deeper comprehension. So this is where students will select a sentence from a story or a text that you are reading, and then they draw it. So if you're reading a CI novel, for example, you could take one chapter or maybe two chapters. So I give each student a mini whiteboard, and with a marker, they will draw a picture that represents a sentence that they choose in that chapter or in those 3 chapters you've given them. And once they're done, and I have them maybe draw for 2 minutes, don't have it go on too long, it doesn't have to be very detailed, and then they show it to their partner, and their partner has to look at the picture and then find the sentence in the text that they drew. And it's fun because the students have to make sure that the picture is detailed enough and tells enough of the story that they are easily able to find that sentence and it's not very general or vague, and that they're looking at the vocabulary that's in there and making sure that that is part of the drawing that they're putting in. So a tip for this is to remind students it doesn't have to be this great work of art, but it's just simple stick figure style art is fine. And to make sure that it is a story that they already understand really well, you've engaged with it with many other CI activities and in their reading, so that they're not focused on understanding as they're looking for the sentence that it represents, but they know the words, and so now they're just looking to find the sentence that is being depicted in the drawing. In terms of differentiation, if you're doing this with novice students, rather than having them choose a sentence, I would say here are 5 possible sentences that you can choose from in this chapter. And that way they're not looking through and reading through 2 or 3 pages, because with novice level students that could take a bit longer, but it's one of these 5 sentences. And so they're just looking at those 5 and then determining what the picture is representing. And then it's fun to display some of the drawings and maybe vote on the most accurate or creative drawing that represents some of the individual sentences that you looked at. The next activity is a running dictation, and this is really about combining movement with reading and writing accuracy. There are different ways to go about this. You could have students with a clipboard and they're going around the room looking at sentences. You could have students just going back and forth between each other. But the idea is in one location, you have written sentences, and in another location, you have a place to write down those sentences, but they require movement between where they're written and where they are reading them. So a way that this has worked really well for me is you have one student who runs to read the sentence. They have to memorize a part of the sentence, maybe the whole sentence, and then they return to a partner who writes it down. So they are telling them. So they had to run and read the sentence, and then they go back and they tell their partner what the sentence is, and the partner writes it. So it's not the same one who's running who's writing. It's their partner who needs to listen now. But neither of them have the written text at that point. And if they have to verify, the runner needs to run back and check, and then go back and tell the writer what that part of the sentence is. So I usually do these one sentence at a time. We check for accuracy, and I'll say for each sentence that's 100% accurate, your team gets a point or something like that. I also use this to preview subsequent chapters. So before we start a chapter, I might have 10 sentences on the running dictation that simply tells what happens in the next chapter of a CI novel. And so after they've done all 10 sentences, they can read that, and they've already read it a lot and talked about it and written it down. So they essentially understand what's going to happen in the next chapter. And so when they read it, they already have that understanding, but they're reading it at a bit more complex level with some new vocabulary, but they're already going into it with a strong understanding of what's going to happen. But it's really fun to have them running back and forth, and if you are able to do it outside and you have nice weather and a place you can do it, that's even more fun. And the last activity is another dictation activity, but this one is dictation with a twist. And this is to practice listening and writing and really working with language and making it a little more personal. So with this, you read a sentence or say a sentence out loud to students, and they all write it down. So it's like, my friend goes to the movies. That's what they all write down. Make sure that's all correct. And then once that's done, you say, okay, now you're going to modify that. You're going to change it, and you have to change the tense. So this is, my friend went to the movies. So they start with, my friend goes to the movies. Everyone's going to write that. But then you say, take that, and you are going to add your twist to it. That's why it's called dictation with a twist. You're going to add a detail to it that makes it a little more interesting. And you can share it out, see what other students wrote. But you want to start with a simple sentence, right? So offer those 2 or 3 prompts after that they're going to change a tense, add a detail, replace a subject, anything that could be possibly connected to the text that you started with. And just be sure to scaffold the prompts depending on the level that you're working with. If it's novice level students, you could simply say add a color. Intermediate students can make it more complex. You have to add on a second clause. You have to add on because and then continue with the sentence. So just keep it at their proficiency level, that where they're starting, everybody can pretty much write that sentence. You want to make sure it's simple enough for everyone to be able to write it in the class. And then, depending on their proficiency level, have them add on a twist to it to make it their own. So a recap of the activities, we had our one word at a time, where the class is collectively writing a number of stories, but just one word at a time. As they start the story with one word and pass it on to another student or another group, they add on another word to it and try to keep the story going. We had our embedded reading, where you start with a very simple version of a text, and then with each subsequent version, you're adding on more details and more complexity. Then we had volleyball reading, where students are reading in the target language to a partner, and the partner translates it, and then they read the next sentence in the target language, and then the other partner translates it. Then we did the draw a sentence, where students find a sentence in the text and they draw a quick picture of it. Then their partner tries to figure out which sentence in the text they drew. Then we had our running dictation, where students read a sentence, go back to a partner and say the sentence to them. They write it down. And then we had the dictation with a twist, where you dictate a short, simple sentence, and then you give students a prompt to add on or modify that sentence that they wrote down. And as you're doing all of these, remember to start with a text. So that keeps you really grounded. You're using the vocabulary and the themes and the topic from the text, whether it is a fictional narrative text or something that you're reading that is details about the environment, about an election or something like that. But keep it on that theme so that students are engaging with that reading or with that listening through both reading and writing. And these reading and writing activities aren't about assessment and testing. They're about processing, playing with the text, and then producing language in a way that's meaningful and accessible. It is definitely preparing them for an assessment that's coming later, perhaps an IPA, an integrated performance assessment. But in itself, these are not necessarily assessment tasks, but it's a way for students to engage meaningfully and in accessible ways with a text that you're listening to or you are reading. So if these are new to you, I would say choose one of these tools this week and try it out. Doesn't have to be perfect. Trust that when students are engaged, they're learning. So if you've already tried these out, maybe you heard something as I was going through that gave you a new idea, a new approach, and how you could do it. But try one of these out this week. Doesn't have to be perfect. And for the most part, they're mostly no prep, which is what I really like about these, because you can make sentences up on the spot. You can have students do the drawing. So you could easily try one of these out and let me know what's happening, how it works in your classroom. Always tag me at WL Classroom on social media, whether you're on X or Instagram or Facebook. And I'd love to know what's going on so I can share it out with other teachers, and I'd love to learn from you as well. So let's collaborate and let's make sure that we are celebrating writing and reading in our CI classrooms as well. Reading and writing has a definite place and should be centered in our CI classrooms as well, and that we move beyond the idea that comprehensible input is more of just input, but once they have that input, how are they going to work with it? How are they going to use it when they are speaking and when they're writing and even reading more on the topic after? So as I mentioned earlier, you can get the CI Toolbox at wlclassroom.com/toolbox. The link is also in the show notes, and it has the explanations of all these activities, as well as the activities that I did on the previous episode on the CI Toolbox. And I'm going to do a third episode with the third set of activities. So you can get all those details for free right there in that CI Toolbox that you can download. So thank you so much for all you do on a daily basis to support and motivate your students. I so much appreciate and enjoy supporting you and your language teacher colleagues as you bring effective, proficiency-focused strategies into your classroom, all these great and fun CI activities. And just a quick reminder that I provide on-site workshops. We could also do live virtual workshops. And I have self-paced departmental PD that you can do on your own that I guide you through. And I also have my new Ready for Tomorrow quick win courses for individual teachers just like you. You can find the links to all of those fun things in the show notes and on my website, wlclassroom.com. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, wlclassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.